The cameras were rolling, the air so thick with tension it seemed you could reach out and touch it. Studio lights burned down on polished desks and restless faces, while millions at home leaned closer to their screens, unaware they were about to witness a clash that would dominate headlines. Maxine Waters' voice cut through the silence like a blade, sharp, unrelenting, commanding. Every syllable came with the weight of decades in Washington, every gesture brimming with fire that could not be ignored. Her eyes burned with the certainty of someone who had battled through storms and had no patience for hesitation. Across from her, Jasmine Crockett sat composed, her posture unyielding but her tone
measured.
She wasn't shouting. She didn't need to. Even in the midst of raised voices and pounding rhetoric, there was a calmness about her, a steadiness that turned the spotlight her way without effort. If Maxine was a fire blazing out of control, Jasmine was the stone wall that refused to crumble. The panel froze for a split second, as if even time itself held its breath. The studio audience, usually so quick with murmurs or applause, seemed caught between awe and disbelief. Viewers at home saw it too, two titans, generations apart, colliding in real time. And in that freeze frame, voices raised, eyes locked, America watching, one question echoed above it all: how did we get here? The clash was not random, not accidental. It was the product of years of building pressures, of values tested, of a political landscape so divided that every debate felt like a battlefield. This was more than disagreement. It was legacy versus new blood, fiery conviction versus unshakable, calm experience versus a rising force determined to chart a different path. The nation could not look away. Clips would soon spread like wildfire, hashtags would catch fire, and debates would spill beyond the studio walls. But in this moment, this exact moment, everything was raw, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. And what happened next? No one on that panel could have predicted. To understand why this moment mattered, you have to step back and see the storm brewing around it. America in 2025 was a country on edge, still grappling with widening inequality, cultural flashpoints, and political fault lines that seemed ready to split open at any second. Every televised debate wasn't just commentary anymore, it was a microcosm of the battles happening in communities, at dinner tables, and in the hearts of voters across the nation. And in that atmosphere, two figures sat at opposite ends of the table, different in style, different in generation, but united by their claim to the progressive torch. Maxine Waters was no stranger to the spotlight. For decades, she had been the fiery voice of resistance, a woman who stared down corruption and refused to be silenced. To her supporters, she was an icon of persistence, the embodiment of righteous fury against injustice. Her very name carried weight, history, and defiance. Across from her, Jasmine Crockett represented something just as powerful, but strikingly new. Younger, measured, razor-sharp with her words, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had fought her. Way up from the ground level and never forgotten what that meant. Where Maxine roared, Jasmine radiated calm authority. Where Maxine commanded with volume, Jasmine cut through with precision. She wasn't there to echo the past, she was there to shape the future. That was the tension that made this clash so electric. It wasn't just two Democrats disagreeing on live television, it was a symbolic collision of eras, the seasoned warrior who had earned her scars through decades of political warfare versus the rising star who had learned to wield her. Composure as a weapon in an age where every misstep could go viral, and the audience felt it. This wasn't petty squabbling, and it wasn't chaos for entertainment's sake, it was something deeper. Legacy was being tested by the future, and the future was refusing to bow. Viewers weren't just watching a debate, they were watching a generational passing of the torch play out in real time, even if neither woman was willing to admit it. For progressives across the country, this moment struck a nerve. Many revered Maxine as a symbol of resilience, someone who had carried the movement through storms when few others dared. At the same time, millions saw in Jasmine the grit and dignity that spoke to a new America, an America that was younger, more diverse, and unwilling to play by old rules. The stage was set not for a polite exchange, but for something seismic. Sparks had already flown in the opening moments, but underneath the noise was a question bigger than either panelist. How do progressives carry forward their vision in an era where legacy and innovation often pull in opposite directions? If you thought this was just another on-air spat, you're dead wrong. This wasn't noise, it was history unfolding, and the next words spoken would decide whether the clash deepened divides or revealed something far more unforgettable. To understand why Maxine Waters erupted with such force that night, you have to understand the legend she built around herself. For decades, Maxine had been a fixture of American politics, the fiery Congresswoman whose voice could cut through any chamber, any interview, any scandal. She was known not just for what she said, but how she said it, with a conviction so unflinching that even her enemies were forced to respect her tenacity. Her legacy was built on confrontation. From the halls of Congress to the streets of Los Angeles, Maxine Waters had made her reputation as someone unafraid to call out corruption, racism, and corporate greed. In the 1990s, she took on the banking industry. In the early 2000s, she clashed with presidents and party leaders alike. And in the late 2010s, when Donald Trump stormed into Washington, it was Maxine who became one of his fiercest critics. That was when she earned her viral crown. One moment in particular crystallized the public's perception of her. During a tense committee hearing, as an official tried to waste her time with evasive answers, Maxine interrupted with 3 words that would echo across the nation. "Reclaiming my time." It was more than a procedural demand, it became a rallying cry. It was clipped into GIFs, blasted across social media, and etched into the hearts of those who were tired of being dismissed. Auntie Maxine, as her supporters lovingly called her, had spoken for them. She wasn't just a politician, she was family. She was the voice you wished you had at the table when power tried to silence you. But with fire comes a shadow. For all her brilliance, Maxine's style was not without its costs. Her bluntness could tip into dismissal. Her passion could, at times, drown out the very allies she needed beside her. She had spent so long being the loudest, the fiercest, the most uncompromising in the room that she rarely had to reckon with what happened when someone else refused to yield. To her, leadership meant domination. Space was taken, not shared. That's the nuance often missed about Maxine Waters. She was both beloved and feared, a hero to millions, but a challenge even to her own coalition. She could inspire thunderous applause one moment and stir discomfort the next. For years, though, this duality didn't matter, because she always won the room. Her charisma, her longevity, her sheer force of will guaranteed her the spotlight. And that reputation followed her into every studio. Producers knew Maxine meant ratings. Opponents knew Maxine meant danger. She wielded her anger like a sword, and for most of her career, it sliced through whoever dared cross her path. But this is where her story takes a twist. Because on that night, Maxine Waters wasn't sparring with an opponent who played by the old rules. She wasn't locking horns with the bluster of Trump, or the smooth evasions of a corporate executive, or the hollow talking points of a cable pundit. No, this time, she was facing Jasmine Crockett. And Jasmine wasn't just another politician. She was younger, hungrier, and utterly unshaken by theatrics. Where others might have backed down under Maxine's glare, Jasmine met it with steady eyes. Where others might have been drowned out by volume, Jasmine had mastered the art of silence, a silence that could feel sharper than any insult. For Maxine, the studio that night should have been just another arena, another opportunity to showcase the unrelenting fire that had defined her career, but something was different. For the first time, the very traits that had elevated her, her sharpness, her unwillingness to yield, threatened to turn against her. She was stepping into a clash, not defined by noise but by contrast. Maxine had built a brand on being the immovable force, but every immovable force eventually meets a new kind of resistance, one it doesn't recognize, one it cannot bulldoze. And as the lights glared and the panel braced for impact, the stage was set for exactly that moment. But Maxine had no idea. Jasmine wasn't here to bow, she was here to stand tall. To truly grasp why that studio showdown carried such weight, you have to know who Jasmine Crockett is, Not just the Congresswoman seated across from Maxine Waters that night, but the woman behind the composure, the journey behind the calm. Because Jasmine's story isn't one of entitlement or shortcuts, it's one of struggle, grit, and a relentless commitment to service that shaped her into the leader she became.
Jasmine grew up knowing what it meant to fight for a place at the table. Raised in modest circumstances, she witnessed early on how inequality carved deep lines across communities like hers. Friends' families lost homes, neighbors were targeted by systems built to keep them down, and far too often, justice seemed like something reserved for the privileged few. Jasmine wasn't shielded from these realities. She absorbed them, and they planted a seed. The belief that if she could learn the language of power, she could use it to defend those who had none. That seed led her into law. Not the lucrative corporate kind of law that padded pockets, but the kind that put her in crowded courtrooms, standing beside clients who could barely afford representation. Criminal defense, civil rights, cases that drew little attention but meant everything to the lives at stake. She became known for her sharp mind and sharper sense of justice, able to dismantle an argument not by yelling, but by laying down facts with a precision that left no room to maneuver. Judges noticed. Colleagues respected her. Clients, many of them society's forgotten, called her a lifeline. But Jasmine's rise wasn't simply professional. It was also symbolic. In a system where young black women were rarely expected to hold authority, she carried herself with a presence that could not be ignored. She didn't need theatrics. Her strength was in the steadiness of her tone, the clarity of her reasoning, the way she held her ground without flinching. Where others bristled under pressure, Jasmine grew sharper. The more the spotlight tried to rattle her, the more she showed that grace under fire is not weakness, it's the deepest form of strength. That poise caught attention, and soon she stepped into the political arena. In Texas, of all places, a battleground, where every progressive voice is tested by fire, Jasmine Crockett won her seat. It wasn't by accident. She didn't inherit a dynasty. She didn't ride on a family name. She built her campaign on the very same values that had driven her in courtrooms: equity, dignity, truth spoken plainly. Voters saw her not as another politician, but as one of their own who had climbed the hard way, and they trusted her to fight for them, just as she had fought for her clients. Inside Congress, she quickly proved she wasn't there to blend into the background. She was outspoken, yes, but not in the brash, headline-chasing way. She chose her battles strategically, weighing words, choosing precision over noise, and when she did speak, people listened. Not because she was the loudest, but because she was clear, intentional, and fearless. Her style stood out in an era where political discourse often rewarded outrage over substance. Jasmine represented the opposite: substance over spectacle, service over ego. That authenticity resonated deeply, especially with younger generations who were tired of performative politics. She didn't just talk about breaking barriers. She embodied what it meant to break them and keep walking forward with dignity and tact. Still, her rise wasn't without resistance. Critics underestimated her at every turn, dismissing her as too new, too inexperienced, or simply not ready. But time after time, Jasmine proved them wrong. She had been underestimated her entire life, and each dismissal only sharpened her resolve. When opponents tried to rattle her with condescension or aggression, Jasmine's response was never to match fire with fire. Instead, she remained calm, measured, and deliberate, knowing that patience, paired with truth, often lands harder than any insult could. And this was precisely what made her such a compelling figure when paired against Maxine Waters. Where Maxine had decades of fire and notoriety, Jasmine brought the fresh dignity of a new generation. Where Maxine embodied the past battles that had defined progressive politics, Jasmine embodied the battles yet to come, the ones shaped by identity, inclusivity, and the quiet power of representation. It is this contrast that turned their eventual clash into more than a debate. It became a generational dialogue, a symbolic handoff, if not of power, then of perspective. Because while Maxine had built her brand on commanding the room, Jasmine had built hers on showing that leadership isn't about volume but vision. That night, As the cameras turned and the lights bore down, Jasmine was not just another guest at the table. She was the product of years of struggle and service, the embodiment of calm sharpened by countless trials, the voice of a future unwilling to be drowned out by the past. And it was this very journey that prepared Jasmine for the moment the cameras rolled. The clash did not begin all at once. It simmered, like a storm building over a tense horizon, gathering energy with each passing exchange. The studio, already electric from the very presence of these two women, seemed to vibrate with anticipation as the questions grew sharper. The moderator had barely finished asking about the direction of progressive politics in 2025. When the spark was struck, Maxine Waters, never one to wait her turn, leaned forward with eyes blazing. Her voice, seasoned with decades of congressional battles, cut through the air. "We don't need lectures from newcomers about what progressives stand for. We've been in the trenches. We've fought the fights. And we're not about to hand the movement over to those who think they know better, just because they're the latest to arrive." It was fire, the kind of fiery proclamation audiences expected from her. Applause trickled in from a few supporters in the crowd, but the tension in the room thickened. The camera caught Jasmine Crockett's expression. Composed, almost serene. She didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch. She waited, her hands folded, her eyes steady. But Maxine wasn't finished. "You talk about calm. You talk about dignity," she pressed on, her voice climbing. "But when the right wing comes for us, they don't play calm. They don't sit back and smile. They come with everything they've got. And I don't intend to see this movement watered down by timidity." The volume surged, words turning sharp, the tone carrying more accusation than dialogue. The moderator tried to interject, but Maxine's voice barreled over, rising higher, pounding harder. Viewers at home could feel it, the old lioness of the house roaring, determined to dominate, and yet Jasmine remained unmoved. She had been here before, not with the cameras and the stage lights, but with opponents who believed that shouting could erase truth. The studio audience leaned forward, sensing a collision coming, unsure how Crockett would respond, or if she even could. When Jasmine finally attempted to speak, Maxine interrupted again, waving her hand with that unmistakable anti-Maxine authority. "Don't sit there and act like you understand the battles we've fought. You weren't there when we marched. You weren't there when we stood up against the very forces trying to crush us. So don't you dare talk to me about dignity. We carved the path that you now walk." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Gasps rippled from the audience. Some heads nodded in deference to Maxine's record. Others bristled at the dismissive edge, the suggestion that the younger generation had no right to claim their place at the table. Jasmine's lips parted, but again Maxine surged forward, drowning her out with sheer force. "This isn't about calm faces and polite tones. It's about fighting tooth and nail. And if you don't have that fire, then maybe you're not ready to lead." The escalation was complete. The studio air felt charged, heavy, as though everyone was holding their breath. The veteran Congresswoman was pouring out decades of authority, her voice echoing like thunder. And there sat Jasmine Crockett, the rising star, her face unreadable, her composure intact, even as she was being pummeled by interruptions and rhetorical jabs. In that moment the contrast crystallized. Maxine's dominance was volume. Jasmine's power was patience. The crowd could feel the dual forces, colliding, old-school fire versus new-school steadiness. Who would bend? Who would falter? Every second without Jasmine's full response deepened the suspense. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens. Audience members shifted in their seats. Even the moderators seemed to retreat, recognizing that history was unfolding, and any attempt to interfere would only diminish the drama. The air was thick with the question, would Jasmine crack under the weight of Maxine's onslaught, or would she rise to meet it with something even stronger? The clash had escalated beyond policy, beyond debate. It was now personal, symbolic, generational. It was dignity against dominance, patience against passion, silence against shouting. And everyone watching knew something had to give. And then Jasmine finally leaned into her mic. The moment lingered like the hush before a thunderclap. Jasmine Crockett, finally leaning into her microphone, didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She simply allowed the silence to stretch, commanding the stage with composure rather than noise. The audience leaned in, instinctively sensing that something was about to shift. Her first words came softly, measured, but each syllable carried weight. "Congresswoman Waters," she began, her tone steady. "With all due respect, you're right about one thing. You carved a path. You fought battles that opened doors for people like me. And for that, I will always be grateful." For a split second, it seemed she might bow her head, concede the stage, and allow Maxine's authority to stand unchallenged. But then she lifted her chin, her eyes locking onto Maxine's with quiet certainty. "But gratitude," she continued, "does not mean silence. It does not mean we stop evolving. And it certainly does not mean that the next generation must apologize for standing tall in the space your generation created." The words landed with precision, sharp yet unflinching in their dignity. A murmur rippled through the audience. The cameras zoomed in on Maxine's face, capturing the faint twitch at the corner of her mouth. Disbelief, irritation, perhaps even unease. She had expected deference. She had expected deference cloaked in calm tones. But what she got was something different. Gratitude fused with unapologetic strength. Jasmine let the silence return, letting her point breathe. Then she leaned in again, voice still unshaken. "You say calm isn't enough when the other side comes for us, but I've faced the other side in courtrooms, in legislative chambers, in the streets. And I've learned something. Volume doesn't win arguments. Truth does. Dignity does. And if we abandon that, we abandon the very moral ground that makes our fight just." The crowd reacted audibly this time. Gasps, nods, even a few claps. Before the moderator raised a hand to quiet them, Maxine shifted in her seat, clearly agitated. Her usual tactic of dominating the room with sheer force had failed to rattle Jasmine. Instead, it only made Jasmine's calm clarity shine brighter. The cameras caught it. The contrast was undeniable. One woman sweating with intensity, the other poised and unbothered. Jasmine pressed forward. "You speak of fire, and I don't dismiss it. There is power in fire. But fire without focus burns everything down. What our people need now is light, guidance. The kind that doesn't just scorch enemies but illuminates a path forward." A hush fell. Even the panelists, who had been scribbling notes and preparing follow-ups, paused to listen. Jasmine's words weren't just directed at Maxine, they were echoing outward, reaching through the cameras into living rooms across the country. Maxine attempted to cut in, but this time the moderator intervened. "Let her finish," he urged, recognizing the gravity of what was unfolding. The crowd applauded that decision, as though demanding that Jasmine be given her full due. Jasmine didn't waste the moment. Her voice steadied, her cadence slowed, almost like a sermon. "I stand on your shoulders, Congresswoman, but standing on your shoulders means I can see further, not because I am better, but because of where you've lifted me. And if I see dangers ahead, if I see opportunities you could not from your vantage point, then my duty is to speak, to lead, to continue the fight in the way this generation must fight it." The words drew a collective breath from the audience. They were more than a rebuttal. They were a reclamation of authority, a declaration that legacy was not a cage, but a foundation. For the first time in recent memory, Maxine Waters, Auntie Maxine herself, appeared visibly rattled. Her eyes blinked rapidly. She shifted in her chair, grasped her pen, set it down again. She was not used to being met with fire that didn't look like fire. She was not used to being disarmed by composure rather than combat. Jasmine's final thrust came with deliberate clarity. "Respecting the past does not mean surrendering the future, and I will not apologize for leading with dignity instead of volume, because the people I fight for, they deserve leaders who can withstand storms without becoming storms themselves." The studio fell silent, truly silent. No coughs, no shuffling of papers. Even the sound of cameras clicking seemed to pause, as if the machines themselves were stunned. Then the applause began, scattered at first, then rolling into a wave that filled the studio. The crowd could not contain it. They had witnessed a shift, a moment of clarity in the chaos of political theater. Maxine attempted a tight smile, but the cameras had already captured the flicker of unease in her expression. The contrast was too stark. too undeniable. Jasmine sat back, not triumphant in posture but resolute. She had not shouted. She had not raised her fists. She had simply spoken with unwavering truth. And in that, she had won. The commentators on the sidelines whispered to each other, exchanging wide-eyed glances. The moderator, sensing history had just been made, stumbled slightly in his attempt to move to the next topic. But the audience wasn't ready. They were still hanging on the echoes of Jasmine's words, still processing the image of Maxine Waters being caught off balance in a way few had ever seen. Viewers at home felt it too. Across the country, people who had tuned in for entertainment found themselves sitting up straighter, rewinding the clip, texting their friends, "Did you see that? Did you hear what she just said?" The debate had turned irrevocably, not because of a clever zinger or a shouted retort, but because calm truth had cut through arrogance like a blade. The moment was more than a mic drop. It was a shift in narrative, a redefinition of what leadership could look like in an era hungry for substance over spectacle. And yet, even as the applause echoed and the cameras caught Jasmine's calm smile, no one in that studio could have predicted what would come next, because the shockwaves didn't stop inside that studio. The applause inside the studio was only the beginning. Within minutes, the clip of Jasmine's poised takedown hit the internet, clipped and posted by eager viewers who had been recording at home, and in a matter of hours, it spread like wildfire. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, every platform lit up at once. The first hashtag to break through was simple: Mic drop Jasmine. Then came others: dignity over drama, calm wins, future of progressives. By morning, Jasmine's words weren't just a moment in a debate, they were a movement. Tweets poured in by the thousands. One viral post read, "This is how you handle arrogance. With grace, precision, and facts. Jasmine Crockett just schooled America on leadership." Another added, "Maxine shouted. Jasmine led. End of story." The comments racked up likes in the tens of thousands. On TikTok, the clip was remixed into countless formats. Some creators slowed down Jasmine's words and overlaid them with cinematic music, turning her speech into something that felt like a movie trailer. Others turned Maxine's stunned expression into looping memes, pairing it with captions like, "When you realize volume isn't enough." Even celebrities weighed in. A-list actors, musicians, and comedians chimed in, sharing the clip on their feeds. One well-known pop star wrote, "This woman just gave the masterclass in grace under fire. Put her on every stage." A comedian posted a skit reenacting the moment, exaggerating Maxine's bluster and Jasmine's serene counterattack. It went viral within hours, bringing even more eyes to the original exchange. Progressive commentators on YouTube and podcasts rushed to upload their takes. Some framed it as a generational turning point in progressive politics, the moment when one era began to hand the torch to the next. "What we saw," one commentator declared, "was not disrespect, it was evolution. It was the necessary clash of past and future. And Jasmine proved she's ready to carry the mantle." Others highlighted the emotional core of the moment. "Jasmine Crockett reminded us," said another pundit, "that leadership isn't about who can yell the loudest. It's about who can stand tallest when the storm comes. That's a lesson every American needs to hear right now." Meanwhile, conservatives tried to twist the moment, framing it as Democrats eating their own. But their attempts fell flat, drowned out by the sheer force of praise sweeping across progressive circles. The narrative had already been set. Jasmine was the calm voice of a new generation, and Maxine, despite her history, had been outshined. Inside political circles, the ripple effect grew sharper. Donors, organizers, and activists began quietly whispering Jasmine's name in conversations about future leadership. "Did you see her composure?" one strategist remarked. "That's the kind of presence that reassures voters in swing districts. She's not just fire, she's credibility." On college campuses, students shared the clip like gospel. In immigrant communities, her words about standing on shoulders while seeing further struck deep chords. Parents showed the clip to their kids, saying, "This is what leadership looks like. This is how you answer without anger." Maxine's defenders tried to rally. They argued that her fire was still essential, that Jasmine's calm might not be enough against the ruthless. machine of conservative politics. But even those defenses felt hollow in the wake of the viral wave. For once, the story wasn't about whether fire or calm was right. It was about how calm had undeniably triumphed in this moment. And still, as powerful as the digital storm was, the resonance stretched even further. Cable news hosts replayed the clip every hour, dissecting Jasmine's delivery, noting the timing of her pauses, the stillness of her body language, the way she never once faltered. Body language experts were brought on panels to explain why. Jasmine's composure made her words even sharper. Late-night hosts joined in too. One joked, "Forget calling it a debate. This was a TED Talk with an audience." Another quipped, "Maxine brought fire, but Jasmine brought the extinguisher." The jokes only amplified the coverage, ensuring that even people who hadn't followed the debate closely now knew the story. The question began to emerge everywhere. Was this the start of a shift in progressive leadership? Was Jasmine Crockett not just a rising star but the star? And through it all, Jasmine herself remained composed. She gave one interview the next morning, repeating a simple line that resonated even more than the debate itself. Respecting the past means building the future. It was clipped, shared, and printed on signs within days. The shockwaves had spread beyond politics. They had seeped into culture, identity, and everyday conversations. At dinner tables, in classrooms, on buses and trains, people repeated her words. The moment wasn't just about a clash between two women. It was about what America needed to believe again. That calm truth could stand taller than arrogance. And yet, for all the memes, the hashtags, and the trending clips, one truth remained. The real impact of Jasmine's words wasn't confined to screens or sound bites, because the true meaning of Jasmine's words would echo even louder. When the shouting subsided, and the memes began to fade into the endless churn of the news cycle, what lingered was not the noise, it was the meaning. What the world had witnessed in that studio wasn't just a clash between two politicians, nor merely an exchange of words designed for ratings. It was something deeper, something symbolic. On one side stood passion, unfiltered, unapologetic, fiery. For decades, Maxine Waters had been the embodiment of that passion, a voice unwilling to bend, unwilling to be ignored. Her fire had rallied movements, called out injustice, and inspired countless young activists. Passion mattered. Passion still matters. But on the other side stood precision, measured, calm, rooted in dignity. Jasmine Crockett, through her composure, revealed a different kind of strength. She showed that one can disarm arrogance not by shouting louder, but by speaking truer. Her words carried weight not because they were forceful, but because they were undeniable. This was more than generational politics. It was a living metaphor for how progress itself evolves. Fire clears the path, but composure builds the foundation. Passion ignites movements, but dignity ensures they endure. That's why Jasmine's mic drop moment reverberated far beyond the confines of a televised debate. She reminded America of something it has often forgotten in its hunger for spectacle. That composure is not weakness, that patience is not passivity, that dignity is not silence. In fact, they are the strongest tools any leader can wield. History is filled with examples of arrogance collapsing under the weight of calm truth. Empires crumble, bullies fall, loudness eventually exhausts itself. But dignity survives. It whispers across generations. It becomes the standard we hold ourselves to when the shouting stops. For immigrant families who have endured mockery and yet stood tall, Jasmine's calm struck like lightning. For young activists navigating chaos and cynicism, her words carried a message. You don't need to lose yourself to win the fight. For every person who has ever been underestimated, because they chose patience over anger, Jasmine proved that composure can turn chaos into clarity. And so the moment transformed into something larger than television, larger than politics, larger even than the two women themselves. It became a parable for our times. In an era drowning in noise, here was proof that quiet strength still cuts through. In a climate of arrogance, here was proof that dignity still stands taller. That is why viewers weren't just entertained. They were moved. They didn't just laugh at the memes. They saved the clip, replayed it, showed it to friends, told their kids, Watch this. This is how you win with grace. The clash between Maxine and Jasmine will be remembered not only for its drama, but for the lesson it carried. Passion versus precision. Fire versus composure. And the realization that while both have their place, one carries a timeless power the other cannot match. Because in the end, arrogance fades, anger burns out. But dignity? Dignity endures. And that's why this moment wasn't just entertainment. It was a lesson for all of us. The cameras have long stopped rolling, but the echoes of that night still linger. Millions watched in real time as composure rose above chaos, as calm truth eclipsed the roar of noise. That's why the title you clicked wasn't exaggeration. The ending really did. Stun millions. Not because it was loud, but because it was undeniable. Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a debate moment. She modeled a lesson for all of us. She proved that in a world addicted to outrage, dignity still has the power to break through. She showed that sometimes the strongest voice in the room is not the one shouting, but the one steady enough to let the silence amplify their words. And here's the truth. That lesson isn't confined to a studio. It belongs to each of us. At home, at work, online. We all face moments where arrogance tries to shout us down, where chaos tries to steal the spotlight. Jasmine's example reminds us we can stand taller, speak calmer, and let truth, not volume, carry the day. So if this story struck you, don't let it end here. Share it. Pass it on. Remind someone you know that dignity isn't weakness, it's strength. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss the stories that remind us who we can be when we choose grace over anger, clarity over confusion, and composure over chaos. Because this isn't just about politics. It's about how we live, how we lead, and how we show the next generation that there's always a higher road to walk. So join us, stand with dignity, stand with truth, and together, let's keep building a future where calm courage always outlasts the noise.